Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street. We have an Algorand video here for you guys today, ALGO on the exchange. Before we go into that, don't forget to smash the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Welcome to the channel if you're new. Welcome back if you've been with us for some time. We are scaling ourselves up towards 10,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. Hopefully everyone's always learning. I know I am every day that I try and do research on videos or at least talk to you guys out there. Absolutely love it. Hope you do as well. Guys, let's go straight into this. Couple of quick updates on Algorand over the last week. We'll also touch into the chart of the ALGO token and go from there. So first things first, this is always good to see with any of the blockchains that we invest in, or any of the other ones as well, of course, that we don't invest in. This is all part of the development of the initiation of blockchain in general, and basically the guidance towards a new financial system, the new way of potentially living, the way we do everything pretty much. So in the last week, we've had the update from Algorand in regards to the upgrade of their blockchain itself. So we see here, this is obviously a few days old now, it's about 4 or 5 days. Haven't had the chance to do this one yet. But for those that didn't know, here we go on the 22nd of June 2023, literally a few days back. The Algorand blockchain essentially upgraded itself to, I think it's version 2, correct me if I'm wrong. And this has basically enhanced a couple of things within the chain. Some things of interest personally, in terms of the speed and the finality of a block has been increased in terms of its latency, 3.3 seconds now to accomplish that block finality. So that's obviously very important when you're looking at scalability aspects of more and more people coming into these networks and these chains. They obviously need to essentially operate any kind of transaction as fast as possible. As more and more people come in, the more clogged it would potentially get into, hence why we've got all these different layer options. And Algorand is one of those, of course. In here, it does mention over 10% improvement of network performance. That's absolutely fantastic as well. And bear in mind that Algorand kind of pushes itself to a decentralized format. This is obviously very good because a lot of the chains out there, or certainly a lot of protocols, sometimes have to delve into some centralized aspects to be able to continue its work, to be able to improve itself. So the fact that it's done that without any of these, or as it says here, no decentralization or security trade-offs, that's pretty impressive. So again, another big thing here which we must mention, so a lot of these chains, a lot of the utilization of the token isn't just for our daily transactions of using the chain, it's also massively used by a lot of developers out there. And that's not just Algorand, pretty much most of the tokens or the blockchains out there have this formatting on utilization of the token. So the fact that it says here there's a lot more tools, the suite's been improved as well. This is absolutely fantastic for the continuation and development of Algorand as it moves forward. So very, very good to see that update. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this 30% up in the last 2 weeks. We'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. But of course, this is slightly oldish news. Those price moves have moved. And in fact, we're actually getting some nice bite points for extra accumulation, which is what I've been waiting for, despite this great news. Of course, I'm here for the long time of Algorand. This is absolutely fantastic to see, and for sure it's going to have an absolutely massive future. The other point I wanted to bring up before we go into the chart, guys, was this. This is worth $50 million, which is pretty much a big chunk of money, as we can imagine. Well, I'd love to have that kind of money. It would be absolutely mental. Think of what you could do to save the world, or at least help towards it anyway. So we've got DWF labs. We'll go into these guys in a second in a bit more detail. But these guys have done a big partnership with Algorand for this kind of deal. It hasn't gone too much depth as to what exactly the partnership entails. But one of the certain things out of this is DWF's ambition to help Algorand build their system, build their ecosystem, and utilize any of the portfolio assets that DWF has in its range to try and encourage them to go onto the Algorand system or build on their system. So we can actually touch on that in a second because DWF is quite a big institution there with a lot of projects under its belt. You see here we select Algorand because of its unparalleled level of technology and security among permissionless DLTs, distributed ledgers. as well as its leadership in environmental sustainability and social impact. Algorand's blockchain infrastructure provides the speed and instant finality required for creators, financial institutions, and governments to smoothly transition to the new digital economy at scale in an environmentally responsible manner. This is big points, guys, because obviously a big part of the Agenda 2030 program through the WF, World Economic Forum, and the United Nations was very much around the diversification and sustainability, greenness of everything. Hence why a big chunk of this financial institution, financial level through the RTGS system, everything we talked about in previous videos, is so important for that point. All of these things have to be ticked off in an ESG format. That's the environmental, social governance aspect that companies almost pretty much have to adhere to over the next few years to gain towards these kind of targets. So we mentioned just a minute ago about the protocol update. Absolutely fantastic to see that. Good timing as well in relation to this article, which to be fair is only from a day ago. I think this partnership happened a couple of days ago as well. But DWF is very much global, constituting itself around a multitude of different regions and countries around the world, albeit most of these are very financially led, which kind of makes sense, especially Hong Kong. We've got BVI, British Virgin Islands there as well. You've got Switzerland, obviously a big one, and then you've got huge entity countries here with a lot of money behind them as well. So big team behind this, but what I was more interested in is their existing partnerships. Which is very interesting to see some of these other ones that we hold in our portfolio. Fetch AI is one of them. I've got Flare. EOS is quite a funny one, actually. When I was at uni about 10, 12 years ago, I kept getting emails about Bitcoin and EOS, and I just ignored them. I was like, what on earth is this rubbish? And hey ho presto, 10, 12 years down the line, well, now he's laughing. Certainly not me, because I didn't have any of it back then, and neither do I now. So that was that story. Yeah, very much around the partnership side of things, guys. We can see further down is some of these projects that may potentially come on to the Algorand system. It doesn't always have to be financially related. Of course, it can be games. We're looking at a lot of artificial intelligence related projects now as well. I think we covered Seedify actually a while back. I mean, there's a multitude of things here. You can start to understand and think about all the different applications of blockchain as we move into this phase. Certainly 2025 to 2030, you can see a lot more adoption, a lot more interoperability within chains, within systems, within projects, protocols, everything. So you can imagine that yes, some of these projects might already have chains already associated with them, but for sure, with the partnership with DWF, you can certainly aspire to the fact that these guys may be pulling themselves across to Algorand at some point. So let's keep an eye on this, guys, because it's very, very interesting. Labs Group is a very cool one, actually. I got a lot of Labs tokens a couple of years ago. This is very heavily in the property market, which will lead nicely on to the quick topic before we go into the charts as well in a second. But you can see there's a lot on here. Self-care, again, I just literally pressed the buttons too fast there. Self-care was on that list of the portfolio as well. Another big project that we hold and cover. We're actually going to be doing AMA with those guys soon. So you can see a lot of variation, and it's quite exciting. So it'd be really interesting to see how many of those come over to Algorand, build the ecosystem, ultimately push that algo price up. Fantastic for everyone that holds it, right? And the final point here, this is just a little article from Algorand. I'm not sure when it was made, but I just want to reiterate these points, guys, because I talk about this a lot, the real estate mechanism within blockchain, certainly from that physical NFT perspective and tokenization of assets. It's no different for the real estate market. And it's great to see Algorand focusing on this area as well. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry here, or certainly a sector. But also there's some really valid points here. Of course, we're in a massive, horrendous situation at the moment with interest hikes, inflation, all of these things. And I said to someone the other day, I was like, it's time now to be savvy and go through the fractionalization of assets, including property, through the use of blockchain. It says here, 39% of under 35-year-olds in the US own their own home. That's a really small number. If you think about how many properties are out there, how many people are in the population, certainly within those age brackets, it's the same over in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same across Europe and other regions and continents. It's just a mess. However, it provides opportunity, but sometimes you have to really look for it. And I would safely say, those 90% that have no idea what crypto or blockchain is, there's a huge opportunity, certainly for those people already in the space, or to understand this a lot more, because you can buy fractionalized assets. You can buy real estate through that NFT protocol. This is not talking about artwork or pieces of art. This is talking about structure structure of smart contracts, the process and the verification of using blockchain, the speed at which of things like Algorand with low costs, and all these things as well. So there's loads of big, massive things here. And in fact, there's loads of companies out there where you can even just sit here. Like I could sit here and buy part of a property in Detroit rather than going through massive systems like before. Yes, of course, there's background checks, credit checks, all this sort of stuff, I'm sure, in the process of KYC and things. But it's so much easier. Same with diamonds and other things that we're looking at for this channel at the moment as well. But it's very, very interesting indeed. I mean, even here, traditional fractional investing platforms typically require a minimum investment of $1,000. If you think about the share to buy, help to buy schemes that we have in the UK, maybe similar elsewhere, where you could buy 20%, 40% of a mortgage, you could actually do it this way, but actually still kind of own the house to an extent. But it opens up the opportunity for less equity to be required to go and achieve this if you really wanted to, or certainly if it's your first time buying. So that's a few great points there. Great developments on Algorand, great advancements, and certainly I love the fact that they're talking about all these areas as well. So on that note, guys, let's jump straight into the chart of Algorand and see where we are with that. So as we can see here, guys, Algorand has very much brought itself back down to just under 13 cents. I wanted to pinpoint a topic here in relation to how low this could potentially go in the coming months, and reasonings behind that really. So this data in particular that we're looking at is from Binance, and it does very much calculate from the beginning of Algorand's movements back in 2019 as we approached this area here in March 2020, the famous March 2020, when of course the pandemic went full swing around the world, but also encouraged the whole entire market to drop around this area. And it's certainly an area of interest over that month or so where I was accumulating a lot of different assets. However, Algorand wasn't one of them. I actually started purchasing Algorand very recently, in the last 6 months for the first time. Especially as it was coming down, I was getting quite excited at this 25-cent mark, but realizing obviously in the winter market, DCAing was really important strategy, dollar cost averaging, that is, for people that don't know. And this is where you kind of position your purchases really on various different levels with a kind of mindset to the long-term approach, right? So there's great opportunities as we see these lower regions as they come in. And I'm particularly interested always around this 12-cent mark. We did obviously have the big dip down here around the 10th of June, obviously this month, so a couple of weeks ago, and it dropped around about 9 cents, and that was an absolute bargain for anyone that got involved. I actually missed around those areas. I think mine accumulated around the 11, 10 cent mark, which is still not too bad, and in the long run, it's not too bad either. So I'm quite infused by this particular part of the area that we're talking about as it is approaching now. I do want to wait to see if we bounce back down to this exact sort of 12-cent mark. So I'm just talking about this slightly lighter green color here, where we could approach in the coming weeks. The reasoning behind this and why I think that we could potentially retest even lower regions, especially towards this sort of 11-cent mark, maybe even back down to that 10-cent mark again. Not because we had this influx downwards just on that day here earlier this month, but as I said before, looking at the data, even way back here in that March 2020 period, the lowest it came down to, I believe, was actually around the sort of 10, 12 cent mark as well. So we're very much matching that particular point. And there's no data below that point. Now, there's two things here, and this could be similar to some of the other assets that we've covered recently where we mentioned this point. Automatic market makers, AMMs, may be in position here. A lot of blockchains use this, a lot of projects use this to ensure that they stabilize over a specific area, not always fully identifiable at the beginning, but certainly something where the chain or the projects orchestrate this to ensure their kind of institutional level buyers, or certainly their bigger investors, aren't affected too much by market reductions that we've seen in the past, and certainly more recently in that snapshot drop down that we saw, which we just mentioned. So there's an argument to say that we may never go down lower than that area because it's not happened before. But again, back on that data point there, I think it's actually 9.5 0.45. So it's very, very, very close, if not bang on there. 9 cents was what we had a few weeks ago. So there's an argument to say that that's potentially in position, but that will play out. In my opinion, I think we will see these trigger points down these lower regions again before we do bounce back up. That's not to say Algorand is a terrible project or anything like this. It's just the way the cycle goes, especially in these winter markets. And I fully believe behind Algorand some of the reasons we've mentioned in the video already and previous videos as well. It's very, very much highly regarded, certainly in amongst the conversations around what's going on with the new financial systems, albeit still a question mark around their decentralized format, but still being potentially involved in things like digital currencies of actual native currencies of countries when we're looking at potential CBDC formats. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But certainly looking at this data, looking at the various Fib retracement levels, I'm just going to zoom in so we see this a bit more clearly. On the last couple of days, we've had not such great movements here in the closing aspect. So I do anticipate that we might come and retest these lower regions. I'll absolutely be snapping those up. Done a couple of manual orders over the last 24 hours anyway. As I said, just around this sort of 12.7, 12.8 cent mark when it dropped down. But I will be looking now, just waiting slightly patiently further to see if we hit these areas too. And as I said, there is always an argument, potentially, even with a big market crash that could happen at any time, we might see even lower than this. We might see, potentially 7-8 cents, who knows? And there's no data to confirm that we've even ticked those numbers off as support levels. So it's a really interesting area to be in with Algorand as a holder, as an investor. But as I said, I'm the long-term holder. Anything, in my opinion, under that sort of 50 cent mark in the long run is an absolute bargain. To be at these lower levels still to this day is absolutely incredible. And actually, if we were to draw a trend line along through here, you actually find that we're kind of bouncing around the areas where we arguably should be if this was a continuous variated line. So again, if we did follow that down, it does branch off to there. And if we really want confidence and foundation in this project, like with any other asset in any other market chart, we do need to test these areas again. So keep an eye out for it, guys. Always worth looking at some potential limit orders. But DCAing is really important because we can grab those opportunities on the downward trend, but also any surprises that we see in upward movements as well. You can see on the indicators on the right hand side here, it's not showing great news for Algorand. Certainly from the year to date, the year in general, the 1 month's down, the 3 months down, it's not looking pretty. That 1 week's up slightly, but only just about, and that will probably conclude itself into red potentially by the end of this week, certainly maybe by end of the Sunday. The RSIs currently are concluding around 46 on the 14-day, 28-day on the 41. This is a good buy point for me personally, but I am waiting to see if that 14-day comes down to around the 42, 40 mark, and thus that 28-day will probably reflect down to maybe potentially a 38 or so mark as well, which again is another good opportunity to accumulate. See how that goes, guys. But for sure, monitor the situation. We probably won't do another Algorand video for at least a week or so. But for sure, if anything concrete comes in, we'll definitely post on the community section of YouTube. I'm trying to get the social media platforms up and running again as well. We've had a bit of complications with them in the past. I'm trying to get those up and running, certainly at least Telegram. So keep an eye out for news on that, guys. But other than that, that's pretty much wrapping up Algorand as a topic, and certainly some of the chart movements and my plays as an investor of the ALGO token. Let us know what you think in the comments below. What have you been doing with your accumulation? Are you selling, buying, being patient like I am? Are you a long-term holder? But in general, I think the blockchain is extremely strong, massive future. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next Algorand video. Take care and bye-bye.